I used to believe that if someone was cheating on you, you would never really know for sure, that it would always remain in the shadows of doubt, hidden behind excuses and half-truths, but what I didn't realize back then was that in today's world, the truth doesn't hide in whispers or rumors anymore. It hides in plain sight, buried inside the very devices we carry everywhere, and once I learned how to read those silent signals, I could no longer pretend that everything in my marriage was fine. It started with the smallest changes, the kind of things you almost convince yourself are nothing, like my spouse suddenly guarding their phone as if it were a diary written in fire, turning the screen away when I walked into the room, setting new passwords without explanation, and keeping the device face down on the table as if even a single notification might betray them. At first, I told myself it was stress from work, maybe a new project or some private matter they didn't want to share yet. But then the late-night messages began, the sudden business calls that required stepping outside, the laughter I could hear through the walls that didn't sound like the laughter we used to share, and the way their eyes seemed to drift somewhere else, even when they were sitting right beside me. I remember one night in particular lying in bed while they showered and their phone buzzed on the nightstand, just once, a short vibration, but enough to light up the screen for a second, and in that second I saw a name I didn't recognize, a name that didn't belong to any coworker or friend I knew, and my heart sank because I realized that the answers I had been avoiding were right there, glowing in the dark. I didn't touch the phone that night, though every part of me wanted to, because I knew that once I crossed that line, there would be no going back, but I also knew that the truth was already waiting for me, hidden in the digital trail my spouse thought they had erased, and sooner or later, I would have to face it. The days that followed were filled with a strange kind of silence, the kind where words were spoken but none of them mattered, where conversations about dinner or bills or weekend plans felt like scripts we were both reading from, while underneath it all, I was watching, listening, and waiting for the moment when suspicion would no longer be enough, when I would need proof. I noticed how they carried their phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, how they would angle their body away from me when typing, how they suddenly had late meetings that stretched into hours, and how their smiles seemed brighter when they were looking at the screen than when they were looking at me. I started paying attention to the little things, the way their phone battery drained faster than usual, the way their notifications were suddenly silenced, the way they would delete entire message threads instead of just single texts. I wasn't a technology expert, but I knew enough to understand that every action leaves a trace and that no matter how careful someone tries to be, the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks. One evening, while we were watching television, I noticed the reflection of their phone screen in the glass of our coffee table. I couldn't see the words, but I could see the rhythm of the typing, the quick bursts of messages, the pauses, the replies that came too fast, too eager, too alive. It wasn't the way you text a coworker or a friend. It was the way you text someone who makes your heart race. I told myself I needed to be sure that I couldn't accuse them without evidence, that maybe I was imagining things, but deep down I already knew. The phone was the key. The phone held the truth, and the truth was waiting for me whether I was ready or not. I began to study their habits, not just as a spouse, but as an investigator. I noticed that they always plugged their phone in at night, but never left it unattended. I noticed that they used Do Not Disturb mode more often, as if to silence the world outside of me. I noticed that they had started using apps I had never seen before, apps with vague names and hidden folders. I started researching. I read about digital footprints, about how every photo has metadata, about how deleted messages can sometimes be recovered, and about how location services track your every move. I learned that even when you think you've erased something, the device remembers. And I realized that my spouse in their arrogance had underestimated me. The more I learned, the more I saw the patterns, the late-night calls that didn't match their calendar, the sudden need for privacy, the way they smiled at their phone but frowned at me. It was all there, written in data, waiting to be uncovered. But I hesitated, because once I opened that door, once I looked inside that phone, I knew I would find something I couldn't unsee. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for my world to collapse. Still, the signs kept piling up. One night, I saw a notification flash across the screen, a heart emoji next to a name I didn't know. My spouse quickly swiped it away, pretending nothing had happened, but I had seen enough. That was the moment I decided. I would find the truth, not through rumors, not through suspicion, through the phone, through the digital trail that never lies. And when I did, I knew my life would never be the same again. I had lived with suspicion long enough, and suspicion is like a slow poison. It doesn't kill you all at once, it just eats away at your peace of mind, your sleep, your appetite, until you are left with nothing but questions that circle endlessly in your head. And I knew that if I didn't face the truth soon, I would lose myself completely. The phone was always there, always close to them, like a second skin, and I began to realize that the device wasn't just a tool, it was a witness. A silent recorder of every choice, every conversation, every secret, and if I wanted answers, I had to be brave enough to look where they thought I never would. One night, the opportunity came. My spouse had fallen asleep on the couch, the phone resting loosely in their hand, and I sat there for a long time just staring at it. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears because I knew that once I picked it up, once I crossed that invisible line, there would be no turning back, no pretending, no more excuses. I reached for it slowly, carefully, as if it might burn me, and when my fingers closed around it, I felt a strange mix of fear and power, because in that moment I held the truth, the whole truth, in the palm of my hand. The screen lit up with a swipe, and I saw the familiar home screen, but it wasn't the apps that caught my attention. It was the notifications, a string of messages from a name I didn't recognize. Messages that had been hidden earlier, but now, in the quiet of the night, were glowing like tiny confessions. I opened the thread, and what I saw made my stomach twist. The words weren't just casual. They were intimate, filled with inside jokes, late-night promises, and phrases that had once belonged to me, words that had once been whispered in my ear, but were now being given to someone else. I scrolled further, and the timeline stretched back weeks, maybe months, each message a piece of evidence, each emoji a dagger, and the more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time lapse, it was a full-blown affair, carefully hidden but not erased because digital trails are stubborn. They cling to the truth even when people try to bury it. I found photos too, not explicit, but enough, a coffee cup on a table I didn't recognize. A selfie taken in a car I had never seen, a location tag from a restaurant we had never visited together. Each image carried metadata, tiny details about time and place. And I knew that if I pieced them together, I could map out the story of their betrayal like a detective reconstructing a crime scene. The more I uncovered, the more I felt a strange calm settle over me. Because the uncertainty was gone, the guessing was over, and now I had proof, undeniable proof, that the person I trusted most had been living a double life right under my nose. But the phone held more than just messages and photos. It held patterns. I noticed how their calls to this person always happened after midnight, how their calendar had work meetings that matched the times of their conversations, how their rideshare history showed trips to neighborhoods they had no reason to visit. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, and the more I looked, the more I realized that technology doesn't lie. People do. I sat there for hours, scrolling, reading, piecing together the puzzle until the sun began to rise and the light of day made everything feel sharper, harsher, more real. My spouse stirred on the couch, unaware that their carefully constructed web of lies had unraveled in the quiet of the night, unaware that I now held every secret they thought they had buried. I put the phone back gently, as if nothing had happened, but inside me, everything had changed. I wasn't the same person who had sat down on that couch hours earlier. I was no longer a spouse in the dark clinging to suspicion. I was someone who had seen the truth, who had touched it, who had read it in their own words. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That morning, I went through the motions of daily life, making coffee, answering emails, smiling when spoken to. But inside, I was already planning my next move, because discovery is only the first step. What you do with the truth, how you confront it, how you use it, that's where the real story begins. I knew I couldn't rush. I knew I had to be careful. If I confronted them too soon, they would deny it, twist it, make me doubt myself again. But if I waited, if I gathered everything, if I built a case so strong it couldn't be denied, then I would have the power, not them. So I began to document. I took screenshots. I saved photos. I noted times and dates. I cross-referenced locations. I became my own investigator, my own witness, my own lawyer, because I knew that when the confrontation came, I would need more than anger. I would need evidence. And the phone, that little device they carried everywhere, gave me everything I needed. By the end of that week, I had a folder hidden on my own device, a folder filled with the story of their betrayal, a story they thought they had erased but had instead written in data, a story that was now mine to tell. I looked at them differently after that. Every smile felt like a mask, every excuse like a script, every touch like a performance. They didn't know that I knew, and that gave me a strange kind of power, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in months. Because now the game had changed. I wasn't the one in the dark anymore. They were, when you finally uncover the truth, when the veil is ripped away and the lies are laid bare. You expect the world to explode in that instant. You expect screaming confrontation. Maybe even the dramatic collapse of everything you thought was real. But what I learned is that the real fallout doesn't happen in one loud moment. It happens slowly, quietly, in the days and weeks after. When you are forced to live with the knowledge that the person you trusted most has been living a double life. And every smile, every kiss, every I love you was tainted by the shadow of someone else. I carried the truth inside me like a secret weapon. And though I had the proof, though I had the screenshots and the photos and the timelines, I didn't reveal it right away because I knew that if I confronted them too soon, they would twist it, deny it, gaslight me into believing I was paranoid. But if I waited, if I let them keep digging their own hole, then when the time came, I would have the power, not them. So I lived in silence, and that silence was heavy, heavier than any argument we had ever had, because every time they smiled at me, I saw the messages they had sent to someone else. Every time they touched me, I remembered the photos they had shared. And every time they said they were working late, I could almost hear the laughter in those late-night calls. It was strange, because on the outside, nothing had changed. We still ate dinner together, still watched television, still went through the motions of a marriage, but on the inside everything was different. Because I was no longer blind, I was no longer guessing. I was watching them perform a role, and I was the only one who knew the script had already been exposed. I began to notice things I had overlooked before, the way they dressed a little sharper when they said they were going to meetings, the way they checked their phone with a flicker of excitement they couldn't hide, the way they seemed more alive when they thought I wasn't looking. It was like watching a stranger live in my house, someone who wore my spouse's face but no longer belonged to me. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the pretending I didn't know, pretending I was still the same, pretending that our life together hadn't already cracked down the middle. I would lie awake at night, listening to their breathing, wondering if they were dreaming of me or of the other person, and the silence between us grew louder than any fight we had ever had. But silence has its uses. In that silence I planned. I gathered more evidence, not because I needed it for myself, I already knew the truth, but because I wanted to be ready for the day when I would finally confront them. The day when I would no longer be the quiet observer, but the one holding the mirror up to their lies. I started saving everything. The ride-share receipts, the location tags, the hidden photo albums, the late-night call logs. I built a timeline so detailed it could have been presented in court, and with every piece of evidence I collected, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control, because the truth was no longer a burden, it was a weapon. But carrying that weapon came with a cost. I found myself withdrawing from friends, from family, because I couldn't bear to smile and pretend everything was fine. I became quieter, more distant, and people noticed. They asked if I was okay, and I would nod, because how do you explain that your marriage is a performance and you are the only one who knows the script is a lie? The fallout wasn't just inside me, it was around me too. I noticed how my spouse grew bolder, how they stayed out later, how they stopped even trying to hide the little things. And I realized that in their mind they were untouchable, that they believed I was too blind or too trusting to ever see the truth. And that arrogance, that smug confidence only fueled me more, because I knew that when the confrontation came, it would hit them harder than they could ever imagine. There were moments when I almost broke, moments when I wanted to scream, to throw the phone in their face and demand answers. But I held back because I knew that anger without preparation is just noise, and I didn't want noise, I wanted justice. So I waited, and in that waiting I changed. I became sharper, stronger, and more aware. I stopped being the person who doubted themselves, who second-guessed every instinct, and I became someone who trusted the evidence, who trusted the truth, who trusted myself. The fallout wasn't just the collapse of my marriage. It was the rebirth of me. And as I looked at the folder of evidence I had built, as I read through the messages and the photos and the lies, I realized that the confrontation was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't just be the end of their secrets, it would be the beginning of my freedom. There comes a point when silence is no longer strength. When holding the truth inside you becomes heavier than the betrayal itself, and I knew that moment had arrived, because every day I carried the evidence in my mind like a secret file. Every day I smiled at someone who thought they were fooling me, and every day I felt the weight of pretending grow heavier until I could barely breathe. I had built my case carefully, like a lawyer preparing for trial, gathering screenshots, saving photos, noting times and dates, cross-referencing locations. And by the time I was done, I had a timeline so detailed it could have been presented in court. And I knew that when I finally confronted them, there would be no escape, no denial, no twisting of the truth. The night I chose was ordinary on the surface, which made it perfect because betrayal thrives in routine, in the comfort of the everyday, and I wanted the confrontation to shatter that illusion. We had just finished dinner. The plate still on the table, the television humming in the background, and they were scrolling on their phones, smiling faintly at the screen, unaware that the very device they clutched so tightly was about to betray them in the worst way. I sat across from them, my hands folded, my heart steady, and for the first time in months I felt calm. Because I wasn't guessing anymore, I wasn't doubting myself, I wasn't afraid of being wrong, I had the truth, and the truth was enough. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice even almost casual. And they looked up, startled, because I rarely interrupted their scrolling anymore. What is it? They asked, their tone light, but I could see the flicker of unease in their eyes, the way their fingers tightened around the phone. Who is this? I asked, sliding my own phone across the table, the screen glowing with a screenshot of one of their late-night messages, the kind of message you don't send to a coworker, the kind of message that drips with intimacy. Their face drained of color, and for a moment they said nothing, just stared at the screen as if the words might rearrange themselves into something innocent. But the silence was louder than any denial. Where did you get that? They finally asked, their voice sharp, defensive, and I almost laughed because it was the wrong question. The question of someone caught, someone scrambling. From your phone, I said simply. From the trail you thought you erased, but didn't from the data that doesn't lie. They opened their mouth, closed them, and then tried again. It's not what it looks like. I leaned forward, my eyes steady on theirs. It's exactly what it looks like. And I have more messages, photos, locations. Do you want me to show you the rest? Their shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of them, and for the first time, I saw the truth written on their face, not in data, not in screenshots, but in the collapse of their mask. How long? I asked, my voice low, steady. They hesitated, then whispered months. The word hit me like a stone, not because I didn't already know, but because hearing it aloud made it real in a way that screenshots never could. Why, I asked, and this time my voice cracked, because beneath the anger, beneath the strength, there was still the wound, still the part of me that wanted to understand how love could turn into betrayal. They shook their head, eyes wet, words tumbling out in fragments. I didn't mean to. It just happened. I didn't want to hurt you. But every excuse was hollow, every apology too late, because the truth was already carved into the timeline I had built, and no amount of regret could erase it. I let them speak, let them stumble through their justifications, but inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't begging for answers anymore. I wasn't clinging to hope. I wasn't the one in the dark. I was the one holding the light, and the light was blinding. When they finally fell silent, I stood, walked to the drawer where I had hidden the folder of evidence, and placed it on the table. This, I said, tapping the folder, is everything. Every message, every photo, every lie. You thought you were careful, but technology doesn't lie. People do. They stared at the folder as if it were a bomb. And in a way it was, because it destroyed the last shred of control they thought they had. I don't know what to say, they whispered. You don't need to say anything, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. The confrontation didn't end in shouting, though part of me had expected it to. It ended in silence, in the heavy weight of truth filling the room, in the realization that the life we had built was already gone, replaced by a story written in data, a story I could never unread. That night, I slept in another room, not because I was afraid, but because I needed space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to let the reality settle. And as I lay there in the dark, I realized that the confrontation wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The moment when the lies stopped and the rebuilding or the breaking began. The fallout would come, the decisions, the consequences, but for now I had done what I needed to do. I had faced the truth. I had spoken it aloud. I had taken back my power. And as I closed my eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always lighter than the weight of lies. When the confrontation was over, when the folder of evidence sat heavy on the table and the silence between us stretched into something that felt like a canyon, I realized that the hardest part wasn't discovering the truth or even speaking it aloud. Hardest part was deciding what to do with it, because once you know, once the lies are stripped away, you can never go back to the comfort of ignorance, and the future becomes a question you never wanted to answer. In the days that followed, the house felt different. Not because the walls had changed, but because the air was thick with everything unspoken, with apologies that came too late and explanations that meant nothing, and I found myself moving through the rooms like a ghost, watching the life we had built crumble in slow motion. They tried, of course. They begged, they promised. They swore it was over, that it had meant nothing, that they still loved me. But every word felt like another lie, another attempt to patch a wound that was already too deep. And I realized that love without trust is just a performance. And I was done playing a role in a story I didn't believe in anymore. I thought about the years we had shared, the memories, the laughter, the plans for the future. And for a moment I almost let nostalgia trick me into staying. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the late-night calls, and I knew that the person I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen deceit over honesty, selfishness over loyalty. So I made my decision. I told them it was over. The words came out steady, stronger than I expected, and though they cried, though they pleaded, though they tried to hold on, I didn't waver. Because I knew that staying would mean betraying myself, and I had already been betrayed enough. The days that followed were painful, of course. Ending a marriage is never clean, never simple, never without scars. There were papers to sign, belongings to divide, conversations with family and friends who struggled to understand how something that looked so solid could collapse so suddenly. But beneath the pain, beneath the grief, there was also a strange kind of freedom. A lightness I hadn't felt in months, because the weight of lies was gone, and in its place was the clarity of truth. I began to rebuild slowly, carefully, piece by piece. I reconnected with friends I had pulled away from. I started journaling again. I took long walks just to feel the air on my face. And little by little, I remembered who I was before suspicion had consumed me, before betrayal had defined me. There were nights when the loneliness hit hard, when I lay awake wondering if I had made the right choice. But then I would remember the folder of evidence, the messages, the photos, the undeniable proof. And I would remind myself that leaving wasn't weakness, it was strength. The kind of strength that comes from choosing yourself over someone who chose to betray you. And as the weeks turned into months, I realized something even more powerful, that the phone, the very device that had once been a source of pain, had also been my salvation, because it had given me the truth, and the truth had set me free. I no longer looked at devices the same way. I no longer dismissed the digital trail as meaningless. I understood now that every tap, every swipe, every search leaves a mark, and that in a world where lies can be spoken easily, data often tells the story people try to hide. But more than that, I understood myself differently. I understood that I was stronger than I had ever believed, that I could face betrayal and not be destroyed by it, that I could walk away from the ashes of a broken marriage and still find a way to breathe, to stand, to rise. One evening, months later, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, and I opened my journal to write the final entry in the chapter of my marriage. I wrote, "My spouse's phone revealed everything." The shocking truth of their affair wasn't whispered, it wasn't confessed, it wasn't even hidden well. It was written in data, in messages, in photos, in timelines, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. But the real story wasn't about their betrayal. It was about my choice. I chose to face the truth. I chose to walk away. One chose myself, and that choice, painful as it was, became the beginning of my freedom. I closed the journal. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not the forced smile of someone pretending, but the real smile of someone who had survived, who had endured, who had come out stronger on the other side. Because in the end, the verdict wasn't just about them. It was about me. And I had finally won. Lies can be hidden in words, but the truth always leaves a trail. My spouse's phone revealed everything. The shocking truth of their affair wasn't hidden. It was written in data. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. This is VowsBurn, where betrayal doesn't hide. It leaves a trail. Subscribe now.